Uganda has one of the world's youngest populations in the world, with over 70% of it being under the age of 30 years. Now, since March 2020, when the first COVID-19 case was reported in the country, the youth have directly and indirectly been affected by this. But as we get used to the new normal, we also need to find a way to bring this 70% on board to help with the response of the COVID-19 pandemic as a country and forge a way forward. Now, if you're wondering, how does the youth come in? Well, we're going to be having that conversation, and we are coming to you live from Moroto. So do allow me to speak some Karamojong. I might mutter it here and there, but I will say Ebelai, which is a casual greeting, and you can say a joke in response. I hope I've said that right. Yeah, I'm learning a few things. Now, joining me for this conversation, I am Rita Kanya. Do know that I will be a moderator this morning. Joining me to have that conversation, I am joined by Miss Florence Okuda, who is a peer educator at the Straight Talk Foundation here in Moroto District. Next to her, we're joined by I have to say this right, Ivan, who is a peer educator also from the Park District, Straight Talk Foundation. And we're also joined by the District Community Development Officer here in Moroto Local Government, that is Maggie Lolem. Welcome, Maggie. And also, we are joined by the Chief Administrative Officer of Moroto Local Government, that is Komakech Charles. Now, joining us via Zoom, we're also joined by Charles Owekmeno, who is the National Coordinator at the SRHR Alliance Uganda, and we'll all be having this conversation together. Now, do know that the hashtag for this is hashtag Youth COVID-19 Response, and this conversation will be going on for about 2 hours. Now, the theme will be young people at the center of the COVID-19 response. And young people like to use what we call social media. So once again, the hashtag is Youth COVID-19 Response. Starting us off with a keynote address, we do go over to Charles Owekmeno, who's going to be giving us just a deep insight into what our conversation will be like. Over to you, Charles.
Thank you, Rita, and greetings to you and the entire team in Moroto. I send you greetings from this other side of the country in West Nile. I am very much excited to join with you and the entire team to have this important conversation this morning. Now, you know, when COVID came in as one of those global challenges, the whole world didn't know how to respond to it. And one of the things that came immediately is that the focus was just on the COVID response from the National Task Force and even the Presidential Directive, and sexual reproductive health, and even other needs of young people were completely not included initially. But as we started engaging with government, engaging with the Ministry of Health, and even as news started coming from all over the country, the need for these essential sexual reproductive health services like maternal health, ART for people living with HIV, especially young people living with HIV, things like family planning services became evident that they needed to be prioritized, and we started pushing for it. I am happy that there's a very great progress about this. At least most of these services are now beginning to be available across the country, and that's a great stride. But one of the things that became a major challenge when COVID came in is the issue around the effect of COVID on young people. And that's where my discussion will focus. Initially, the general perception was that young people were not affected, young people are energetic, the COVID will not do anything to them. There wasn't even a reflection on the effects on the young people. And I think everyone can agree with me that that has been proven wrong. The young people are among the most affected by COVID, according to our research, and also the findings that we have and the feedback we get from young people. First of all, the channel of access to sexual reproductive health services, such as the contraceptives, family planning services, and even information were not prioritized. And what are we seeing today? The spike in the cases of teenage pregnancy. Secondly, many young people are not speaking out, but they are psychologically so much affected. Those who were in school and they're at home, they're asking parents all type of questions. Why are we not in school? What's going to happen? Will I be promoted? All those kind of questions are coming up from the young people. And that points to the fact that there's a serious psychological effect that have come with COVID. And we actually do not yet have a clear package of how we are going to address this. Although some of our partners like Richard Network of Young People, Uganda Network of Young People Living with HIV, Restless Development have come up with a package that would help to counsel these young people online and through the phone contacts. But still, we need a very comprehensive programming because the young people have been so much psychologically affected. The other effect that we are seeing now that has come up is the issue of sexual and gender-based violence. We saw, just like teenage pregnancy, there was a serious spike on the rates of sexual and gender-based violence. And that means that the community support systems were not prioritized during the COVID response initially. And what we are seeing is now the effect of it. Many young people are there at home and they are being molested by even some of them by their relatives, some of them by their parents, as we have been seeing in the news. So this is also something that has come with COVID, and it's a big pointer that we actually have this problem in the community and people have not been speaking about it. And it's time that we prioritize it. Now, particularly for Karamoja and even across the country, one other biggest effect of COVID on young people's health has been how they would cope with accessing information digitally. Initially, they would have the teachers to speak to them, they would have their peers to speak to them, and all these channels are not now readily available. So information is getting digital. So how do we support these young people to be able to access this information still on the digital platform? The adults have phones. The young people don't have the phones yet. Majority of them don't have. But even if they do not know how to use them effectively to be able to get the kind of information that they will need that's appropriate for them, but also to protect them from accessing information that may not be appropriate for them. So this is also one of the main challenges that has emerged with COVID. And from our side as the civil society, we are inviting all the stakeholders, the parents, the government, to think about this. We know Ministry of Education is already making progress by making sure that young people are able to access educational information online through different online platforms. But we should also do the same for sexual reproductive health. Maybe we need to think how we can use some of the platforms, like, for example, the U report by UNICEF, like Sauti Plus, from Richard Uganda, and all these online platforms that partners have. How do we bring them together to make them more supportive to the young people on how they can access information on their sexual reproductive health? The other thing that has emerged that is of a serious concern to us, the civil society, is the issue around vulnerability of young people because of the economic effect of COVID. The girl child is even much more affected. Already, many people were taking advantage of the girl child to sexually abuse them or to make them involved into early sexual debut because of their economic vulnerability. They will give them 10,000 just to buy parts and take advantage of them. Now, this, from the statistics that are coming up, is likely to even double because now the economic effect of COVID has started biting. Parents are struggling to afford even what the family can eat a meal for a day. Now, how about these needs of these young people? Like, for example, the sanitary pad, who is going to buy them when the parents are looking at food? So that's where people are going to begin to take advantage of this girl child and some of these effects that we're seeing of the teenage pregnancy and even sexual violence are going to continue to spike. And so we must have a deliberate plan of how these can be addressed so that the vulnerability of the girl child particularly is not worsened as it was already bad. So those are some of the key effects that from our side as the civil society, we think are very core. And particularly for Karamoja region, it's important that the partners working in this region, even the government, we plan how we can address these emerging issues to help the young people cope. I want to again state categorically clear that the young people need to be supported to cope with the COVID, but also the post-COVID period, so that their life is not so much affected as we are now seeing coming up. Now, the other thing that I would like to share with you and also the audience out there is that it is high time that we need to think how we can cope with COVID, but also the post-COVID life for young people. Because we are going to have this disease with us for some time. It means that our programming needs to refocus from what we were previously doing, but at the same time, we need to think of the post-COVID era, how things are going to work. And so it's something that we want to start the year with, thinking through, and see the kind of packages that we can come up with that would work for young people without them being so much affected by COVID. One of the things that we want to emphasize and want to think through is the digitalization of sexual reproductive health information. How are we going to ensure that a young girl in Napak, in Amudat, in Kabong, a young girl and a young boy in Moroto, a young girl and a young boy in Kotido, Abim, is able to access the information, the same information that a young girl and a young boy Kampala is accessing amidst the digital era. So this is something that it has emerged, but we are also thinking through it as a civil as the civil society. Because even those young people in the rural community, they have the same rights to information like the young people in Kampala. And us as the partners and government, we have a responsibility to support them to achieve that. Now, that is the biggest emphasis that we would like to make going forward, so that equally young people are able to access the information. And why this is important is because we are seeing that there is a big prioritization of digital communication of essential health information, but a big proportion of young people are going to be left out if we don't make deliberate efforts to ensure that this information is equally accessed by those young people in the rural area. So that is our challenge going forward. We would like to focus on going forward is the role of young people. The Sexual Reproductive Health and Rights Alliance piloted a youth-led COVID response program in West Nile, which is where young people are the one driving the processes. They're able to reach out to their fellow young people. They're able to link with the health facilities and make sure that young people who are in need of services and information are reached. They are using all available means to be able to access their fellow young people. So this is one of the efforts that we bring on the table, and would like to encourage all the partners that the young people can actually play a significant role in the COVID response. We have seen in the national response setup at the national level, the role of young people was not clearly defined. When it came to the district level task force, the role of young people and their involvement was not clearly defined. And even at the community level, but we want to change this narrative. We would like the young people to have a key role to play. Let them sit on the national level response team. Let them sit and share ideas on the district level response team, but even let them play the role at the community level. That's one of our biggest recommendations. And from the West Nile region where we engage them, there's a great story where their fellow young people's life have been transformed. I want to give an example of young people living with HIV. It's their fellow young people that has been taking them the drug and even counseling them. So that means that if we prioritize the role of young people, we can get a great impact in our core recommendation.
Charles,
Finally, as I conclude.
Okay, let me let you conclude,
Yes.
and then I'll ask you this. I wanted to ask you, when you talk about the youth participation engagement from the national level, what do we need to empower the youth with to have them actually know that they have a voice and they should be a part of these conversations? Because for a while we have seen the youth just expect from the government and not never expect to be called to the table to have these discussions.
Well, Rita, the thing is that, first of all, we have so many empowered and great young people across the country. I want to talk from the perspective of, if we aggregate the number of peer educators that have been empowered by civil society across the country, they are in thousands. And these are young people who are already resource persons. What we just need is to be deliberate, to involve them, to clearly define where they can play a role, and they will be able to deliver. So the young people are there. It's just about us being deliberate on that. Secondly, we need to focus on programming that deliberately targets the young people so that their fellow young people are able to play their role to reach out to them, because they know where their peers are, they know how to access them, they also know how to communicate to them. So the missing link is that in our response setup for COVID, we were not deliberate to define the roles of young people and also to prioritize some of their needs into the response. That was the gap, but we should change that and make sure that young people play a critical role. And now, more than ever, Rita, it's even needed, because you have seen that we're already having a big number of new infections coming up among young people, including those who reported to school recently. Therefore, we must also have a communication that speaks to them, because these are the communication approach that we have been using was general and it's for adults. How are we going to communicate to young people so that they also take responsibility and prevent COVID and also prevent the related effects that we are seeing? So those are the critical things that we are recommending as civil society.
All right.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much, Charles Owekmano. He was joining us from West Nile. He's the national coordinator at SRHR Alliance Uganda. Now, bringing the conversation back here in Moroto, we are joined by two peer educators who he has mentioned. Peer educators are very important in having the youth participate in this role, but also we are joined by a cow, that is Mr. Charles Komakech from the Moroto local government. I'd like to just have you start off by telling us your remarks from what Charles has mentioned, your fellow Charles has mentioned, from the government side.
Very much, Rita, for giving me the opportunity to say a word or two and make a comment on what my colleague has mentioned. To begin with, during the lockdown, as you all know, almost most activities came to a standstill countrywide. There was restrictions on many things, including even movement. That would allow the young people go and access services. And you are aware that at the national level, we had the National Task Force for COVID-19, and at the district level, we also had task forces that were shared by the resident district commissioners of the various districts. Now, the composition of these task forces were quite broad. It included many categories of people. And I want to say from the beginning that you know, COVID made limitations on numbers of people, who could participate in a particular meeting, and therefore you would not expect to have as many youth as you would wish to have on the committee. People were only represented in those committees. And I want to start by saying that even the youth that my colleague Charles was saying possibly were not included, were represented to their leaders. We had leaders represented on this committee, and even the officers that that handle youth activities in the district were part of this task force. Now, as a district in Moroto, when this lockdown was announced and the restrictions made, we saw it wise that there were certain activities that we could not afford to put aside. Activities like HIV/AIDS, activities like for TB, activities like for malaria cases. These are life-threatening activities that when you put aside would even yield more negative results than even COVID-19. So as a district task force, we also included on this list the sexual, reproductive health and right and GBV activities that we allowed as a district task force under the leadership of the RDC to remain operational. So in Moroto, as the first step, we allowed activities of young people to continue during COVID lockdown. And we allowed partners who were operating in those areas to continue working, because we knew that during the lockdown, the schools were closed, the youth were at home, they are very, very redundant, doing nothing. Those services which they used to get in schools were no longer there. And as you know, the saying goes, an idle mind is a devil's workshop. So they would cause us more problems when they're doing completely nothing and sitting. So we allowed those activities to go so that they continue to get services, they continue to get information that they need. Besides that, as a district, we set a separate task force alongside the district task force for COVID-19. We set a separate task force for GBV and sexual reproductive health. It was quite unique. I don't know whether the other district did the same, but as Moroto District Local Government, we agreed and said, because of the lockdown and the redundancies of the youth and the young people, we needed to have a special consideration to address those issues. So we set a task force that meets up to today, every Tuesday, to look at issues of how youth are getting information, to look at how we can handle their sexual reproductive health needs during this lockdown.
And have there been any things that have changed along the way? You know, because the whole point of these meetings that you mentioned, Tuesday meetings, is to see what has worked, what hasn't worked. Partners have been reporting. Partners report on what they've been doing every week, whether they're making progress or not. But I can assure you that because of that regular meeting and setting a separate task force, we have managed to give a lot of information during this time. We may not be able to measure how much it has changed, because change needs time. But we gave the required information, continue with the services during this lockdown, and made sure the same services that the youth deserve, the young people deserve, reached them during COVID-19 lockdown. Besides the GBV and the sexual reproductive health special task force, we also had our youth corners in the health facilities opened and operational. You know that they used to get services in schools, and now the schools were closed and all the students were at home. And we knew this was going to create a very big gap if we had also closed the youth corners in health facilities. So our youth centers, youth corners remained operational and opened, and we would encourage the youth to reach the health facilities and get those services that they used to get while in schools and elsewhere. We had announcements on radios, we had talk shows telling them that if they are going for the purpose of getting sexual reproductive health services, the police, the roadblocks, and so on would allow them to go. It was very, very clear, and they were not hindered at all. My colleague talked about economic services.
that the vulnerability that the youth had during the lockdown, and they could easily be lured by small monies to get tempted and get messed up. I want to say that in Moroto and also other districts, the government has programs that addresses livelihood for youth, especially those ones who are out of school. We all know about the youth livelihood program that is there by government. And in Moroto, we have about 400 million in circulation in the hands of the youth, revolving in the hands of the youth. Those activities continued. We're also lucky to have had UN Women interventions here. That was giving 5 million shillings for every youth group. And we had up to about 240 youth engaged in these activities to empower them economically so that they don't get tempted, so that they have something that is going on that can give them money, so that they're not lured by people during this lockdown. All those were attempts that were geared towards making sure that the youth get busy during this period and do something for themselves.
Well, we're glad we have the youth here, and we have Florence, we have Ivan, and perhaps we'll start off with Florence, who's next to you, Charles, to tell us, Charles has talked about the youth corners. Have you heard of them before? Have you heard of the youth corners before?
The youth corner?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
You have, and have you had access to them?
Yes.
You have? What
Yes.
do you go there for? What do the youth in Moroto district go to the youth corners to do?
Anyway, the youth corners in Moroto, like young people do visit the youth corner to access some services like HIV information and the effects, and even the information about teenage pregnancies and testings, and actually counseling and guidance for the young people.
I see Maggie here next to me agreeing and saying, yes, those are services that are offered there. But to your experience, Florence, and I'll also be coming to you, Ivan, your experience from March, what has it been like? Because before you're a peer educator, you're also youth. What has it been like from March to November, this COVID-19 pandemic?
Actually, from the starting of March this year, COVID-19 was really brought really challenges to the young people, whereby on the side of education, it's really affected the education, whereby the pupils, the students, they were back home. Then from there, when they're now coming home, some of them, they were idle, some of them disrespect actually the parents. From there, so the effects really affected these people. It's like young girls many number of young girls got pregnant because of the COVID-19 affected the education side. Then the young people really engage themselves on alcohol, and really the example I can give of recent this last week, since the young people engage themselves on the drinking alcohol, last week my experience, I got the young three boys last week in Europa. They were having that competition of finishing 1.5 liters. So from there, the three of them, they were like having a competition of finishing. Then on the process, one of them was like collapsed after finishing 1 liter, and he really died on the spot. The second one was brought to the hospital, and the third one was also brought to the hospital. So that's one challenge facing by the young people engaging themselves on the alcohol side. Then and those young boys, they were really on secondary level, actually, in senior 2. Then from there, another challenge affected by the young people on the outside side, the villages, the young people have engaged themselves on raidings, and many of them, they have lost their lives during this COVID-19 because since they were idle, nothing to be doing, actually.
Well, Florence, all that you mentioned, I see Maggie taking down some notes. I see you, Charles, taking down some notes. It's unfortunate to hear things like drinking competitions as a way of passing time here in Moroto. Something that you'd want to hear in any way. But this is information that I don't know has gotten to your ears, Maggie. And if it has, from the side of a government, what then happens? Because as Charles Owakmeno had mentioned earlier, there's a need for a change in the programs that are already being given to restructure to what the districts are facing at this point in time. A pandemic and a group of youth that are trying to forge their way forward, and also in one way keeping busy, not the best or the busiest ways.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's true that COVID-19 has really caused more problems to the young people than before. I think you've heard from the young person. Drinking is a challenge in this community. Actually, they start drinking as early as 8. So sometimes we just pray that school should open or COVID should end so that the youth get back to their normal lives. But as government or as a department that is housing youth programs or implementing youth programs, we've had a lot of dialogues at community level. Despite of the COVID-19, we've been observing SOPs, we've been having focus group discussions with the young people, we've been using peer educators to speak to their fellow youth, actually to stop drinking and stop sorts of funny acts at community level. They are still young people. Why should they redirect their energy to things that are not beneficial, that are not developmental? So as a department, we've had a lot of meetings, we've had a lot of dissemination of the laws, and we've had a lot of engagements with the young people through different forums. We even organize special events. We use special events like World AIDS Day, Women's Day to advocate for the rights. It's a platform where we advocate for the rights of the young people, for the activities to be integrated in other government programs, which we have really succeeded. I want to say we have succeeded. All these programs at community level talk about young people. At least they touch the young person. And of late, because of the increased violence at community level on the young people, we have also rolled out the Safe PAL application. This is just a small application by Ministry of Gender with support from UNFPA. It helps them to report any case of GBV. And it is, since the youth don't disclose things easily, so this application helps them to report to the next person who could help them come out of these problems. And we've also experienced that during the lockdown, the young people who are engaged in livelihood projects had it rough. The income generation activities were not yielding results like before. You see, the little money, the grant we gave them through livelihood program and the UN, as Kao said, some of them at first were doing very well. They were even refunding the money. But since the lockdown, there weren't a lot of activities, really. The recovery rate of the fund was also small. Then the benefit to them was also too small. So we went into telling them how to cope up through, again, financial management trainings by the commercial office and partners who supported income generation so that we can see how best they can cope up with their income generation activities. And also we also felt like the youth are also missing out. There was an information gap. Because initially we had big dialogue meetings of about 100 people, 200, but of late we reduced the numbers because of COVID. So I think our information flow is also affected because of COVID. But nevertheless, we use the media, like the radios, to send information. We also use posters. And we use our peer educators to meet small numbers, to encourage the youth to live a decent life. And the issue of overdrinking, of late, we also passed bylaws at community level already to stop drinking. You know, if you go drinking, you're penalized. your parents are talked to. There are a lot of things that are happening. And even young people who are working in mines, we ensured we came up with a bylaw on child labor. And that was operational in one of the sub-counties. Then for the young people, we also encourage them to do something better, not to live in mines, because these are hard to reach places where they can't access services easily. Our VHTs are also restricted a bit. You know, you can't move long distances to some of these areas. So we encourage them to settle in places where they can access more information on reproductive health. And because of this, we feel that our young people in the COVID period really were not left out completely. At least something as the department was being done, a lot has been done. And we had a referral pathway for those who were affected for survival of gender-based violence. We still had people to support them, walk them through the challenges they have got. So a lot has been done.
Okay. Really. When you mentioned there are a lot that has been done, just going to what you mentioned, SafePal. Yes, a digital platform, an application. How many of those in Moroto are able to access them? Because one of the things that Charles Okweno mentioned earlier is, yes, a few programs have been brought here and there. And even you mentioned there's a limitation when it comes to access to this information in terms of the number of youth that can actually now access these dialogues. But with that in mind, where does a conversation now need to turn? I know you have mentioned the peer educators, but what more needs to be done? Because if you have a brilliant application like SafePal, but the person that's supposed to use it does not even have access to a smartphone, then in one way or another, there's a limitation there.
Yeah, true, there's a limitation. The SafePal works for those with mobile phones. It works for those who live with aunties, brothers with mobile phones, but for the community, for our friends in the community without phones, it may not work. But nevertheless, it's good to give them information. One day they might also get a phone. But I think what will work for us here better is having more peer educators on the ground, then using structures, change agent structures. Change agent structures, we have the male action groups. These are men who have really spearheaded change at community level, creating awareness on gender-based violence, referrals. I think we invest in this. Then we have also approaches like the SASA. SASA is an approach of empowering the communities. The change starts with me, then it spreads to the rest of the community. I think young people should be taken through this approach. Then also we invest more on, I think, a one-to-one, peer-to-peer education. I think this works better. Like, we have many young people really who have taken us through this together with the rest. I think this works better because they speak the same language. Then I think this also needs a multi-sectoral approach. We need to bring many people on board, all the stakeholders. We need the police on board, we need the teachers, the parents, we need the technical staff on board, we need the politicians, I think the doctors, everybody. It is a multi-sectoral approach. I think this is when we will have a big coverage of interventions for the youth.
Okay. Well, when you talk about the peer educators, Ivan, we have you here. Ivan, you were in P7 at the start of this year. You were in your vacation. You had plans of going to school, but that stopped along the way. But you're a peer educator. What do you tell the youth now that you talk to?
Okay, what I can talk to my youth is, since ask me like this, the thing has really affected even my education. I was to continue my education, but they stopped. Not even education, even this lockdown, let's say movement, even organizations, and so forth. So, as much as talked, like this thing has brought really a lot of drinking, a lot of HIV and AIDS. There's nothing I'm going to talk more, as the way my colleague has finished. Like, okay, the thing was I was to had something like, let the government help us to have more, some mask to to fight against this COVID-19 and some things which are needed to fight against this disease. Thank you so much, madam.
Okay, Ivan, just staying with you. You mentioned, the things you're not doing, the things you encourage the youth not to do. But if you are meeting me on the road today, I'm a youth, I'm a girl here in Moroto, what would you advise me if you are my peer educator?
I will advise you to be 2 meters away from the rest, should be washing hands thoroughly, and should be putting on a mask each and every time. And that's what I can tell you as my peer educator.
Okay. It's you, Ivan, who's the peer educator. Why I ask Ivan that is because Ivan has this information. Ivan knows this information. But Ivan, unfortunately, cannot reach each and every perhaps agement in a park district where he comes from. And earlier I had mentioned that one of the things that government has gone on to do is, use radio to pass on these messages, use the posters. But as we continue to see the cases continue to grow with just the youth, as you had mentioned, the COVID-19 cases, even Charles had mentioned it, then where do we go back to say what is wrong with the messaging? Is there something wrong with the messaging that's being sent out? And I'll start with you, Charles.
Yeah, thank you for that question. Just like we mentioned earlier on, that the lockdown came up with a lot of restrictions. The DCDO Maggie mentioned that even big gatherings cannot now take place. And yet, those were avenues for us to reach the young people and talk to them. The peer educators used to have meetings with these young people where they would talk to them and deliver their message to them. But that is no more now. There's a restriction of how many people they can meet. Meaning that the extent to which messages can go to the young people is limited, leave alone the speed at which it will move. As a district, as I mentioned earlier on, the only method that was available for us was through the media, the radio, where we thought we would talk to the young people and give them information and access. We opened the youth corners in the health centers thinking that would be where they can go and get more information. But the lockdown also locked movement. Some places are very, very far, where the youth cannot move and reach those places. They are redundant at home and doing nothing. Just like the peer educator mentioned, that they are now involved into drinking because they have nothing to do. We have the Safe Poll application that has been launched by Minister of Gender. But even that is limited to the extent that unless you have a phone, a smartphone. But one thing we have not talked about the Safe Poll is that you can report about a GBV issue in your community. You don't necessarily need to be a victim to report. So meaning if I see an issue, a GBV issue with you, I can report that my neighbor is being abused. I can report on your behalf. You don't need to report. So meaning that even if the youth don't have the smartphones, so long as the willingness of people to report about such issues is there, the report will always come. What we may need to do differently is to make people know about these applications and how it is used. And we shall see these cases coming. But I should also say that despite all these limitations, our partners have done a lot. As Moroto, we have a GBV center, which was operated by Mifumi and it's now handed over to us. And we are now operating it. And everybody in Moroto, every young person knows about this. That there is a center designated for that purpose to which you can report such issues. And professionals are there to handle your issues. It is a very big challenge because we have to find a way of reaching the young people And it is more difficult in this region of in Karamoja region, because of the several limitations. The youth in Kampala have phones and can reach each other, they have WhatsApp and so on. But in Karamoja, it is quite difficult. The little we have tried, we really think has done some improvement. If this was not done, the situation would have been even worse. It is not, we can't rule out that during this lockdown, teenage pregnancies has taken place. We can't rule out that. But our interventions most likely has limited the number, the extent. It would have been worse than that. We can't rule out that during this lockdown, many infections have taken place, HIV infections. But we really think also that the infections would have been much higher if we had not done anything at all. We really also think that many youth have engaged themselves in drinking, drug abuse and so on. But we also think that this would have been worse if we did nothing completely as a district. Possibly we need to now think about more innovative ways of reaching them more than we have done before. And as I told you earlier on, we have a GBV task force separate from COVID-19 that meets every Wednesday. Yeah, every Wednesday. And partners discuss. The youth leaders are represented in this task force. And these issues which they discuss get into the district task force for recommendations on how we can integrate the issue of the young people in COVID-19. This has helped us a great deal. Yeah.
Well, we're going to be taking a short break in just a bit, but when we come back, as we continue to explore the roles of young people amidst the COVID-19 pandemic in the Karamoja region, we also have one thing you mentioned, and perhaps you didn't really touch on it, is the fact that we also have societal community restrictions. You know, as peer educators, we have Florence here, but what we know is that a number of times a girl in many places is seen to just supposed to stay at home, you know, and if Florence will tell us her experience when we return. For her to say, I'm going to spend my day going to talk to my fellow youth, and perhaps for some parents, they feel that, no, you need to stay home, you need to be helping us at home, and that shouldn't be where you should be going. And Florence will start from that when we come back, as we continue to see now forging the way forward. We've seen the limitations, but the way forward, how do we bring the young people at the center of the COVID-19 response in the Karamoja region? For now, let's take a short break. Welcome back. We're still having the conversation about young people at the center of the COVID-19 response, and we're having this conversation here in Moroto District. We're taking a look at exploring the roles of the young people amidst the COVID-19 pandemic. In particular, this morning, now afternoon, in a few minutes, we'll be taking a look at it from the Karamoja region perspective. And we had just touched on the fact that there's also a societal holdback or a threshold that stops the young people from even being a part of this response. And just to get into that, we'll ask peer educator Florence to share with us where you feel that the society in one way or another holds you back from even helping your fellow youth. Share with us your experience.
My experience on the rights. In my community, actually, you'll find parents that are against the rights of the children. So whereby from Rupa, you'll get even a young child going on mining sites. It's the one going to do activities on the mining site, then getting the gold and sell, and actually to buy food for the family. You'll even get a girl child of 12 years, 14, 13. It's really engaged in mining activities. From there, when I do go to have my sessions, my implementations with the young people, so you'll find that the rights of the children, they're really the parents are not really taking it as the important thing. So they always talk to us, even the really parents, because when you go to deep villages, there is like a big tree whereby you can get parents there, the old elders actually from the villages. They're like, why are you always coming to sensitize only the young people? Like when I can explain it to them. So from there, they are like, these rights you're making they are making the youth not to get what they really wanted to do, like a girl child. You'll get a girl child of 15, 14. It's really forced to get married. The parents are really denying the right of that child, like an education. So they are like forcing a girl to get married because of just the cows, like 15 or 15. Like this time, you'll get a girl child. It's like forcing her to get married because of just the parents to have a benefit of 15 cows at the start of the marriage. Then other cows will come later. So one, that's already denying a girl child on the education side. So you'll find even girls from the home, they're not given the rights of playing with other kids. You'll get even a mother actually beating a child because a child went to play with other kids, leaving the home, homework, washing plates. So this child has no time of going to meet other friends, playing, work, so they deny on that side. Then again, on the side of actually the boys, you'll get the young boys. They're the ones who are taking the cows for grazing. So on that moment, the child is not even has not reached actually on the age of taking care of the taking animals grazing. You'll get a boy of 12 years under the sunset. Yet the big people are still staying at home. So from there, you'll find that the right of that child is still abused. Then you'll find again a girl child carrying a heavy jerrycan. Like one time, I met a young girl carrying a big jerrycan. She has already got some soil which they got gold from there, but she brought yesterday, or assuming it was yesterday. So she got her when she was carrying a heavy jerrycan of 20 liters, and she's 13 years. So when I was like asking her, she was like, "Hey, what if I leave? Who is going to take care of the family?" I was like, "You mean you have no parents?" She was like, "Yes, I have my parents, but they do go to those small centers to take their boost. Then in the evening time, if I fail to buy some food for the family, they will beat her." So from there, I was able to tell her, so I need to explain this to the parents. So I went to tomorrow morning explaining about the rights of the children. The woman was like, no, these rights are making our children to be lazy, making our children to undermine them, to disrespect them. These rights you do tell these children are now growing with a different life because of these rights of a child. So on the side of the men, they were like, no. These rights should be stopped from town, not to be extended to the village level, deep villages far from town. So let these rights be there. So let not be exposed to the village level actually. So I was like, no, as we Ugandans or entire world, child has the right to go and play, to go and eat. You'll find even sometimes some parents in deep villages, because they are failing to get food, like to eat, like you can get the parents going to the drinking places from there, and not even providing any food to the children. Then in the evening time, they got children. Then in the morning again, a parent can go to the drinking places, not even bothering about how the kids that wake up this morning, how they're healthy actually. So from there, they're abusing the child's right. Then again, from there, mostly at the deep villages, they're like these rights. Really, it has changed the children, not like some elders, they were like, not like that generation actually. That generation, there were some discipline. Whenever a child, a child cannot have that authority of talking to a big person about what, talking about other issues. So these rights, they have really strengthened these children not to have respect for them. Respect for them. So this rights, they don't want actually. That's why they're still doing the other activities they've been doing in that generation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, Florence, what you mentioned, and Maggie will touch on it, and perhaps Charles, you two can come into it, is how these cultural norms or these cultural beliefs in one way or another hold back the youth from exploring the perspective of them coming in to help with the COVID-19 response.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to say that community beliefs, norms hinder youth participation in activities that affect them directly. I just want to, for instance, give an overview of how, okay, the parents, let me start with this. Parents don't have time with their children or with their family members like before. You see the traditional Karamoja, the mothers and the fathers in the evening set up a fire, and the women talk to the girl children, and the men talk to their boys about the issues that affect them. This discussion today seems to have ceased, you see. So this tradition for me was a good tradition that would promote child development, that would promote children or young people's participation in issues that affect them, and you'd get to learn who your child, who your son is, and what are his needs, and how do you go about them. So if this was promoted, then the youth's activities at community level, I think, would not be hindered, because they would know what they are up to and what they would like to do. And also, when you look at the traditional setup again, it has no opportunity for the young people to express themselves. Like, for instance, in a cricket, their cricket doesn't give opportunity for the youth to say something. This is a holy shrine where the Karamojong elders pray or speak to their God. And in this case, the young people are very distant. And what is discussed there, it doesn't even affect the young people. It's not issues. It's not promoting issues of the young people. So for me, if these shrines or these gatherings called a cricket would speak about the issues that affect the young people, then I think the young people's participation would excel at community level on issues that affect them. Then also some parents restrict children from moving. Even the peer educators get it hard, you know, to get out of home to speak to a peer about their issues. So in this way, again, the peer educators who are trained will not be beneficial to the rest of the community, because they have no time to share what they learned, to counsel their friends, or redirect them to get a service. And this is in line with parents overwork children, you know, in this community. The children are almost breadwinners. They're the ones who carry. I think it is evident when you move around this town, you can see a lot of girls and boys carrying charcoal, carrying firewood, you know. And when you go to the community now and do a roll call, most of them are just seated under trees enjoying. You see, they leave millions in the hands of young people, like the young boys, the hard boys. You see, so for me, if this would change, this hinders young people's participation in activities. You're overworking them. What time do they have to visit a youth corner, for instance, to get information on their sexual reproductive rights? What time will they visit a peer to speak to them about issues that are affecting them? If teenage pregnancy is a problem, if child labor is a problem, for instance, if COVID really has impacted on them, how do they share their experiences? So I look at this whole traditional setup of the Karimojong or society having really a direct impact on the young person. The young person is not free to speak on issues that affect them. So for me, if schools were open, for those who are in school, they would benefit a lot from the schools, because they have teachers to speak to them, they have fellow students in school, they would interact freely. But the home environment, I think, needs to be helped to let children or let the youth also do things that interest them. Yeah. Then the community structures should integrate youth participation as something that is very key, that would promote maybe the young people's activities. Like, for instance, the shrine I was talking about, the aggregate. If they had a representation of the young person to speak, that would be a voice to the rest. And that is where decisions are made, you see. So now, if decisions are not made on issues that affect the children, maybe, for instance, drinking in the shrine is said no, this maybe teenage pregnancies, then how would the other youth be helped? It means the work of the peer educator is somehow hindered because they have no space to speak freely with their friends. So I think this is why we feel like application like SafePal will be very important if it is rolled out. Just as the cow said that even if you don't have a mobile phone and somebody has it in the community, this would help the reporting of incidences of gender-based violence, you see. Then community dialogues, if we had a number of them, then this would also help us. Then if we build the capacity of probably the community structures, like the male action aid, the SASA, the change agents, the mother group, the family support. So I think these structures would help the peer educators to move around to speak to other young people freely.
Okay. Well, Charles, we'll just have you say something. Yes, Florence, would you want to add something to the conversation? Yes, please.
Yeah. I wanted to add something what district staff has said about aggregate. So about aggregate, when we do go and meet other young people in the community, when we were like talking about really about COVID-19, the effects and how it really contaminates to another person, the elders, they were like, no, for us, we don't know about COVID-19 actually. They're like, we have already do it traditionally in aggregate, that COVID-19 will no longer be to them. And I was like, no, COVID-19 doesn't know about our beliefs in our aggregate. They were like, no. Those days, even HIV started from town, and you people started coming to the villages, talking about HIV, doing like a drama outreach to the communities, to their communities actually. They're like, that's how HIV extended it to them. So they were like, never talk about HIV, about COVID-19. We have make it traditional to protect, not to reach to them. COVID-19, it will remain to town side only.
Interesting thoughts there. Thank you, Florence, for sharing that from Akirikets. So, Charles, just to add on to what Maggie has said before we bring in Ivan into part of the conversation.
Yeah, thank you. Just like the DCDO has mentioned, the Karamojong culture, just like most African cultures, is very restrictive, very prohibitive of certain things that young people should do and what they should not do. It bars them. The elders still holds all the powers in this community. What they tell the young people, they must follow without any questioning. And that is the situation deep in the villages there. That is the faith of our peer educators when it comes to interacting with their other peers. And yet the strength of our communication to the youth, to the young people, and helping them on issues on reproductive health and right lies mainly in the hands of the peer educators, whom we think would pass this information. Now just imagine if they are restricted by elders. It's a very big challenge. In this community, there's a lot of work overload on children, just like the DCD has mentioned. The old people use young people a lot to do almost everything. And that has implications on the time that they have to interact with each other. They hardly have the time. Those engaged in herding, looking after cows, spend the whole day there. Where will the peer educators get them? There are those you see moving with charcoal, selling, and where do they get the time? So the effectiveness of our peer educators will depend on the availability of time which our elders can give to the young people to talk to each other. Short of this, it is a very big challenge. So the aggregate, as we are talking about, is a very powerful organ that controls behavior in the community. And in my view, those are the people we should also target. The elders. We have the male action group, whom we should target in as far as we have been targeting them for GBV activities in families, in household, and so on. But I think we need to target them specifically on issues of the young people, so that they appreciate this at their level and be able to give the young people time to talk about their issues and allow them to talk what they want to talk. Just like, in African culture, Karamojong culture inclusive, there are certain things young people are not allowed to talk about, especially issues relating to sex. It is a preserve of, in our culture, preserve for the aunties, the uncles, and so on. But are the uncles doing that role? Nothing. Are the aunties doing that role? Not anymore. In the schools, the senior women teachers and the senior male teachers are doing this job for us. But in the communities, no one is doing that. We have the peer educators to talk about this, to do that role. But unfortunately, the young people whom they are supposed to talk to have no time, because the parents engage them without any single time left. So in my view, as a way forward, we need to engage these elders who hold a lot of power, who determine what young people should do in the course of the day and what they should not do. We need to target that cricket to talk about these things and make them appreciate that young people need information. They need to share issues among themselves if they are to develop into full human beings.
All right. Thank you, Charles. Now, as Ivan, just to bring you in, Charles, you earlier mentioned leadership and how leaders should be the ones that, in one way or another, represent the issues of the youth. Yes? And help play that role in particular areas. And Ivan, do you ever have access to your leaders to speak to them?
Thank you so much. That I have in my district is nowadays fine. Children's rights are changed, whereby you'll find that children are just doing their own things. When a parents now try to advise, you'll find that a child can even step on a parent, whereby this is the thing that has been brought to this poverty. See, that's what I'm going to add on. Yeah.
All right. Charles, on the issue of leadership, when we talk about leadership, and you mentioned way at the beginning, you said, if there's a leader of the youth, then they can represent the issues of the youth in these discussions. But sometimes when you realize what is said at the top and what is reflected at the bottom sometimes are two different things. Yes? Having more of the youth's voice, apart from just the leaders, yes, coming to these conversations at the table, but what Meno Charles had mentioned earlier, let's have the youth at the table. The youth like Ivan, the youth like Florence, have conversations with you, Maggie, and Charles.
We appreciate that this government acknowledge the contributions of youth on issues that affect them. And that's why we have structures of the youth right from the village up to the district level. And it is on that premise that it is deemed that at least they should bring in their issues at every level. Because you cannot have every youth, say like in the meetings at district level or at sub-county. but their own leaders whom they elected, like in the youth council, from the village, sub-county, the parish, sub-county up to the district level, would talk about those. And I did mention that these leaders are involved in this. But of course, you know, being involved is one thing, but how effective they are is another thing. But as a district, we also know that sometimes even the youth leaders represent issues of their own. They definitely may not collect views from their colleagues and come and talk issues that affect their people. So in the district, we have organized young people's talk. I think during the COVID, we had about 2. The last one was Uganet, organized by Uganet. And we engaged the young people on sexual and reproductive health and their rights, where the young people themselves talked, and they talked. This time, not leaders at the district level or sub-counties, but we picked peer educators like these ones here. We picked youth leaders in the villages, bold young people who can talk for themselves. And they shared. The information was very, very amazing indeed. And that's how far we think we can go to collect views that are beyond the leaders. Getting it from the people themselves, from the young people themselves, not through their representatives. Because we also know that representatives in most cases talk issues of their own. They talk their minds, not the minds of the young people.
So do you think there should be more engagement often? Because the thing is, yes, we talk, we realize the problem, but we should have more.
Exactly. And that is what COVID-19 has limited us to do. Because that is what we used to do at the village level, at the sub-county level, where we would have youth meetings and share these issues. But when COVID came in, the limitations of numbers that you can interact with became an issue.
As you mentioned the issue, perhaps now we can try and define the roles, because the keynote speaker also did mention the need to define the roles of the youth. Do you think that this is time to define the role of the youth, to say that sometimes, even without government perhaps organizing this, but how can we come and say, Florence, you become a peer educator and help us get these particular views? Let's start with you, Maggie, on that.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I think it's very important that issues of youth are integrated in many programs. Just as I said that I think we need a multi-sectoral approach. We need everybody on board, including the young people themselves, so that their issues are resolved according to the different needs that arise. And I want to say that issues that affect the youth, they are really different issues. And we need different interventions. And we need more partners on board to support us. As the technical people or as a department handling the youth, we may not be able to work with them throughout. Alone, we need support. That's why I encourage that we need to train more youth, like the peer educators, who would come out voluntarily to support the rest. This is more sustainable. And once they appreciate their role, then everything will work well. And I think the approach of youth to youth is very important, young person to young person, because these are people who don't easily disclose issues, you know. They are fearful, they don't break the silence. So when you use the peer educators, the young people themselves, to spearhead, then they open up. And I think that is why we have a lot of programs that we need to implement directly with the young person. These are not young people that they don't know what they want. At least it's a group of persons who at least understand. They are not so child that they don't understand. They know their needs, but they need a bit of guidance. And I am happy that the Ministry of Local Government, the Ministry of Gender, and even the District Local Government Moroto has come up with a lot of programs and a lot of policies and laws that protect their rights. And once they appreciate this, I think it will be more meaningful to them. Then they will have direction where to go. I think this is the support they need from us, the technical people and the community. Then I think at community level also, we need to speak again to the local people to understand that, you know, we don't need to let them walk alone. We need to work with them. Once the community people appreciate and try to reduce on the traditions and the norms that hinder their work, I think everything will be okay. But we need to come up with programs that are young people led. You see, a solution comes from you yourself. And I think that is why when we used the SASA approach is power or peace starts with me. When I appreciate and I identify a problem, then I'm the best person who can easily solve it and help others after appreciating.
Okay. Charles, would you like to add on to that?
Yeah. In the disability movement, they have a saying that there's nothing for us without us. I want to build on that to strengthen what Maggie has said about young people-led approach. We are not going to do much if we shall continue to pretend that we know things of the youth, of the young people, and we can do it for them. As a district, we have been providing them with funds to facilitate their meetings at sub-county level, at parish level. And these meetings are intended to make them talk about their issues. And we thought that was a very good avenue for the youth to talk to each other. Our only limitation has only been funding, that this activity relies mainly on local revenue, which is very little in most districts. But we are very committed to do that. It is a high time we need to redesign our approach of helping the young people and make them take charge of these interventions. How I wish the program that we had some years back on a program called PAL, Program for the Enhancement of Adolescent Reproductive Life, which facilitated young people to move in the villages, to move in the parishes, to move at sub-counties, holding meetings, and giving information to each other. It was quite a wonderful program. How I wish that kind of program could be brought back in a region like Karamoja, where information gap is still very, very high, where people don't have access to ICT, mobile phones, smartphones, and so on, and they can be reached manually, where meetings are still very critical as a way of passing information. For people in Kampala, meetings may not be so relevant because every child has a smartphone, and through WhatsApp, through the safe PAL, they can talk to each other. But in a district like Moroto and Karamoja region, those kind of interventions where the young people take lead is still very, very critical if we are to reach and help these people. Where we need to break the chain that the elders have on these young people. That would be very, very critical.
All right. From what you mentioned, it's something that perhaps we are learning with this pandemic, is that either borrow what has worked before or change what has failed into something new. Well, we're now going to be taking a short break, but we continue to have the conversation, taking a look at exploring the roles of young people amidst the COVID-19 pandemic, and in particular in the Karamoja region. Good afternoon. We're coming to you live from Moroto District. We're having a conversation and have been having it for about 1 hour, 30 minutes now, exploring the roles of young people amidst the COVID-19 pandemic in the Karamoja region. We've taken a look at how the cultural bit of beliefs in one way holds back the youth from being a part of this. And also we've taken a look at just failure to have access to this information. Now another bit, and many sometimes often forget, is the youth that have a disability. It might be hearing impairment, it might be the inability to walk. All these in one way or another fail to have them be a part of these conversations. But we do have peer educators who are joining us for this conversation. And Florence, from your engagements with the youth, As a peer educator, where do you find that we have left behind our brothers and sisters who might have a disability? Yes.
Yeah, thank you for giving me again the opportunity to talk. I really, at this juncture, take my appreciation to Straight Talk Foundation and other organizations for having not leave young people to go like undergoing on challenges during this COVID-19. And really they brought us as peer educators to engage us on trainings about communication skills, whereby I was able to communicate the message to other young people in the communities. From there, that was I was now able to meet even disabled young people in the communities actually, whereby the information was not reaching to those disabled people. Whereby you can get some disabled person, a young person who is disabled, cannot move, cannot access the information actually. Even if we reach to the community, he or she cannot manage to move out where the sanctions takes place. So from there, I was able from there to reach inside, whereby I was like other young people, where are the disabled people, because they are really missing the information. They were like, hey, some people are inside because they cannot move outside. So I was able to reach there. I got a young lady, really, she was disabled. I asked her whether she can allow me to interact with her, and she was like, yes. Then I was like, anyway, the conversation was going well. I was like now coming to that side of supporting. She was like, no one has never ever reached her, to pass the information to her, to pass the information to her about even COVID-19, about even HIV, even whether the disabled activities are insisting. So I was like, no, the things about disabled people are insisting. I was like, what about the youth disabled at the village level? Can that person be able to access you with this information? She was like, no, those disabled people, they reach to the sub-county level to have the meetings about the disabled people, so that person cannot be able to come and mobilize, since he was like, she was like having that youth was disabled, but he can be able to walk up to the sub-county level. So from there, even that person, she can go there, attend that meeting about concerning the disabled people, but the information she gets from there, she cannot reach to them at the village level. So the moment he finished the meeting, he cannot pass the information to them that they talked about this. They are talking maybe these things about them. So I was like, how did you get this wheelchair? Then she was like, there is some certain organization, actually was like will thank over this organization will thank her. Yes. Those people, they were reaching inside. Then they got her without even any support of a wheelchair. So they were like, hey, they were having interaction. So those people were able to help her to give the wheelchair. So I was like going forward to ask her. Then those days when I was reaching to district level, I got some wheelchairs at the district hall, which they were distributing to disabled people. She was like, no, this LC one of ours doesn't want even to pass the information to them. That's why she was like, doesn't any support at the district level. The listed one is less concerned, so he likes only things which are like they can tell him the people to benefit. That's why he can fix his people. Okay. So concerning disabled, he's less concerned.
Yeah. Yeah. Ivan, what has been your experience?
Is
with the disabled people?
According to my side, is from disabled people, unless the government help us with something like transport, like a bicycles for reaching where they are. You know, when we go there is no way. And even let the government give them also some chairs at for transport, whereby they can reach the information. So that's what I'm asking the government to help us according.
Thank you, Ivan. Now to bring you in, Charles and Maggie, and perhaps we'll start with you, Maggie. Florence does mention, and also Ivan mentions, those who cannot be able to come to these youth centers that we've talked about. But let's talk about those who are able to perhaps walk, but they can't speak, and you don't have someone who can actually be able to interpret the sign language. So communication in one way is now hindered, or in one way I can't hear, and you're trying to tell me I can't be able to communicate with you. So what are you doing for those in particular youth centers?
Yeah, thank you. It's true that really the young people who are disabled have a lot of challenges, but as a department that is still housing the sector of youth, disability and elderly, we are still doing something. We have interventions in place. We have a senior CDO who is in charge of disability, and this one supports in planning and budgeting and lobbying, mobilizing resources for the sector. We also have a structure. We have the Youth Council, the Disability Council at the district. This one also supports in lobby advocacy for the issues that affect the disability sector. But I want to say that this is the least funded sector. It's a cross-cutting issue, though, that needs really attention. Because when you look at even the district partners and programs, there are very few who are focused on disability. But I am happy that we have NUDIPU here. NUDIPU is the National Union for Disabled Persons. They are here in Moroto, and they have really given us great support in this sector. And I want to say that as a department, we haven't abandoned any person with disability really because maybe of their disability. We deny them maybe access to services or programs. We integrate them in our programs at the sub-county level. We have our ambassadors there. We have the CDOs. At the sub-county level, we have the ACDOs. We also have unions of disability persons there. So this helps us to support or address, try to understand what their needs are. Then when you look at our programs, most programs are also disability friendly. At least if you went to most of the health sectors.
When you say disability friendly, try to paint a picture for us.
When I say disability friendly, I'm talking about programs that reflect activities or that try to address issues of disability. For instance, when you go to a health center, there are ways, runways, walkways or rather, that are friendly to them. They can go through using their wheelchairs. But I think the challenge the disabled person have is that they don't have enough devices. Like for the blind, maybe they don't have the walking sticks. Then there's some who are disabled, physically handicapped, they don't have the wheelchairs. We last got wheelchairs from Rotary Club Kampala through Honorable Nokrach. We got 100 pieces of wheelchairs. That was in 2017. So that's a long time. So we rely on donor support for devices that to support the disabled persons. But nevertheless, even those that don't have. We have outreaches, like for health centers, we have our VHTs. Then we have the health staff who go for outreaches. So they're able to capture or to support or give services to persons with disability. And I want to say, yeah, true, we lack interpreters, but we have people who have basic knowledge at least, who have basic knowledge on sign language. At least they're able to communicate. Although not detailed, they haven't gone to a school to learn all this, but at least they can communicate to them. But it is our wish that we could have trained people, or we could have special needs education program that will really help now that sector of disability, or the disabled persons, the young people, and the children. If this section is revived fully and functional, then I think issues of communication will be resolved, issues of planning on how we can support them, lobbying and advocate, because they understand more the issues of disabled persons. Then I think even most of our facilities, would now be friendly for them. The environment would be friendly for the persons with disability. They would walk in easily or come out easily, or they would even access the services. So those are some of the challenges we have as a district. But I know through partnership support and government support, we know even those listening could get interested and give a hand to the persons with disabilities in Moroto district.
Okay. And lastly with you, Charles.
Yeah, thank you. As a district, we know and we realize that people with disability need special attention. During COVID-19, everybody was vulnerable. Everybody was vulnerable, including the able-bodied persons, because of the limitations that the pandemic imposed on people. Now, if everyone was vulnerable, you can imagine how people with disabilities would be more vulnerable than the rest of the other population, meaning that the situation was even worse for them. If even able-bodied persons got it hard, then the people with disability got it more harder than anyone else. Look at our interventions that we had during COVID-19 of passing information to young people, like through the radio. Imagine a person with disability, a young person, who had hearing impairment. How would he or she continue getting that information? Imagine that person who had a physical disability and possibly had no wheelchair. How would that person reach the youth corners when the peer educators were not allowed to move to reach them in their villages where they are? Imagine that one who had sight problem, the blind. How would they get such services? So during the time when we had COVID-19 and the vulnerabilities that it imposed on people, the young people with disabilities had even it rough than any other person. And that is the point where we needed more specific interventions to target them in the community so that they get the same information like the others who were being targeted. Whereas we have structures for people with disabilities at the village, sub-county, parish, and district level. But I think that was not enough. They can advocate, but you can imagine how vulnerable they are to do this advocacy. Programs that the government has that was giving livelihood is all inclusive. It's all inclusive. And it is a requirement that when you have a YLP group, for example, all categories of people should be present in that group, including people with disability. Because experience also has it that if you organize a group that is consisting of people with disabilities alone, there are certain activities that they may not handle. And for the purpose of inclusiveness and integration, it will not be good to separate, say, these are a group of people with disability and this is for physical-bodied persons. It will be widening that gap between people with disability and able-bodied persons. So our programs, our government programs like YLP, like WEB and so on, is supposed to be all-inclusive so that the people with disability work together with able-bodied persons. But in my view, that cannot make us reach every person with disability with programs that can make them come up at the same level, like physically able-bodied persons. It is still restrictive. And it is at this point that we would need interventions that specifically target them, even with informations, even with livelihood, even with communication. That would be our preferred interventions, fund permitting. In the district, we have of recent, we have a full officer. We have a senior community development officer in charge of elderly and disability, whose work is to mainstream, to lobby, implement activities of people with disability. But as my colleague has mentioned, funding is a problem. Of recent, we also interviewed and recruited a focal person for the National Union of People with Disability, NUDIPO. He's a resident in Moroto here, and we think that is a big step in ensuring that issues of people with disability is pushed into the agenda, into meetings, into every corners of implementation. Because mere saying that everybody should be disability sensitive may not be enough. We need to have someone to cross-check and see that their issues are not left out. And that would be our desired position, actually. The young people, given their age, given their tenderness and so on, and if they're now even with disability, they are more vulnerable than the able-bodied ones. So the situation is a little bit harder in that direction.
Well, this afternoon we have been able to explore the roles of young people amidst the COVID-19 pandemic in the Karamoja region. And as we have this conversation, the theme was under young people at the center of the COVID-19 response. And we've had two peer educators share with us the experiences of how they're being able to do something. And if you're out there wondering, well, you're just waiting on the government to do something, there's also something you can do if you are a part of the youth of this country. But from us to you, we're saying thank you so much for joining us in this conversation. I was joined by Florence Okuda, who is a peer educator here in Moroto District and works with a Straight Talk Foundation. Next to her, Lokol Ivan, who is also a peer educator from Napak District and works with Straight Talk Foundation. Now, we did have Maggie Lolem, who is the District Community Development Officer at the Moroto Local Government, and also joining us from the Moroto Local Government was the Chief Administrative Officer, Charles Komakech, and who earlier joined us was also another Charles Owokmeno, who is the National Coordinator, SRHR Alliance Uganda. We do know that there's something you can do, and you have had it. If you haven't, and perhaps you'd also want to say something, you could also use the hashtag Youth COVID-19 Response. But thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. That does it for our conversation. Coming up is NTV at 1 with Romeo Busiko. From us to you from Moroto District, have a good afternoon.